never wanna hold you back. I wanna give you every chance to make it, to make it. I'm afraid if our love collides, you'll leave me alone tonight. 'Cause I'm changing and I'm breaking. Is this over? I'm scared to ask these questions, 'cause I know that you'll reject my love. Moving slower, frozen to these pieces without a shoulder to cry on. Will only climb the mountain without your goodbyes, 'cause you're my life. If I fail and crumble, would you help rebuild this downfall and change the color of my falls? I never wanna hold you back. I wanna give you every chance, and I'll stand against all enemies, your enemies. I'm afraid if our love collides, you'll leave me alone tonight. 'Cause I'm changing and I'm breaking, but I'll still be your superhero. I'll be your superhero. But I'll still be your superhero. I'll be your superhero.
The summer's calling. The summer's calling. If the kingdom is overthrown, meet me at the cornerstone. I know that I can't be without you. This
G'day. Just do a quick audio check. Test. Yes, good. We're good. We are live. PowerShell101 Live. Welcome. Hope you guys enjoy it. Today is another jam-packed day. Very, very, very full of good content for you guys. So, yeah, well, let's get stuck into it. Hope you guys stick around for the stream. It's again, 2 hours, standard thing. And today we're going to be covering PowerShell operators and PowerShell and filtering. So operators are kind of just a bit of a prerequisite. So I was kind of thinking about it. I can teach you filtering, but you're not going to be able to use it until you understand operators. So we're just gonna quickly breeze through most of the operators, not all of them, because they're just, some of them are not really going to be applicable for this course. Other things like where others will be. So it's always good to have that. So anyway, let's get started. So let's go. So again, questions, those kinds of things, you can definitely throw them up. If you want to follow along in the demos, you can definitely do that. Slides are up on the OneNote link. So again, if you feel free to pop it in chat, and I'll send you a Discord invite. We can go from there. I'm just going to quickly step away from the stream. I just need to answer this phone call. 1 sec. Sorry about that. Let's get stuck into this. So, let's get stuck into this. So, first things first. Let's jump in the room. So if anyone wants to jump in. All right. Let's get stuck into it. So, again, the agenda for today is PowerShell operators and PowerShell and filtering. All this content's available online, obviously slide decks, things like that as well. Will be is available via Discord. You can just jump on the Discord channel and go grab the links, and you can follow along through that. Assessment, again, this is more homework. It's not really assessment, but it just helps you guys obviously reinforce what you're learning. So essentially, the task is to automate the following. So using Client Hyper-V, you want to build a VM, then you want to install Windows 10 on that VM. Using that VM, on that VM itself, then install OBS Studio, and then install Visual Studio Code. So that's just the kind of assessment. It's very basic, but essentially I want you guys to kind of follow along, see what you think, write your code. If you're already writing PowerShell, write it. And then basically the more you go along, then probably it's going to be a better chance you're going to refactor your code. So essentially, yeah, cool. All right, PowerShell logical operators. So all this content that's going to be available is all available online. So I pretty much will, if I'm going to teach content, the first place I'm going to go to is Microsoft documentation. So essentially, and I'll still go back to the documentation, but essentially this is just going to be the documentation, except I'm obviously going to be able to articulate just a little bit more on top of that, and we can actually do some demos with it. So with this specific this lesson, we're actually just going to be doing slide demo. So you guys don't have to wait to the very end to see the demos. And it's just hope, especially with these kinds of, this is a little bit more of a deep dive. So essentially, it's just going to help you obviously see those practical examples prior to having that something else squished into your brain and then losing it. So first things, really terrible really terrible quality of screenshots, but essentially actually, is that, no, you've actually got the full screen. So essentially I want to quickly talk to you guys about the AND operator, the OR operator, the NOT OR operator. The NOT operator and the XOR operator. So these operators are used extensively in most programming languages, so it's not something that you guys are probably going to be very familiar with. But for the people who are not familiar with, I generally find explaining it with logic gates just makes it a little bit easier, because logic gates are really where the fundamentals of this come from. So essentially we have the AND operator over our left hand side here. So what we can see here is, I'm just going to go pen. we have what we call a truth table. And a truth table basically is it's just a quick representation of the inputs and the outputs of a specific binary operation. So essentially, this comes down to binary operations, and it's the same with PowerShell in the sense that an AND, an OR, and not an XOR will be evaluated to be an either true or false. So they're never going to be, it's not going to be something else. It's essentially, is it a true, or will it evaluate to be true, or will it evaluate to be false? And this is basically the equivalent of a 1 or a 0. So I'm just going to erase all the ink on the slide. So let's just have a quick look at our AND operators. So AND operators are basically used with when you have multiple inputs. So this is on our left-hand sides of our logic gate are defined as our inputs. So we got input here, input here, input here, input here. Now our inputs are basically essentially how obviously the data that you're passing into the specific operator. Now in this instance, basically both A and B have to be true, or have to have in a logic gate's perspective, have to equal 1 for the output to equal 1. So if it's 1 here and if it's 1 here, then it's 1 here. Otherwise, any other condition, it's 0. So we can see this through the representation of a truth table where we've got a 0 and a 0 and an X. So 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0. So if we just quickly clear our slides, erase all ink. So if we go 0, 1, and 1 here, it'll equate to be 0. Because both values need to be 1. It's pretty simple as that. So obviously you have both 1s, you're going to get a 1. Otherwise, you're going to have 0s. So the best way to think of an AND is it's this and this. Essentially they're joined together. They both have a requirement to exist for an output to exist. So let's quickly clear our screen. We have our OR gate. OR gate's basically similar to an AND gate, except any condition that, any evaluation, any positive value from A or B on the left-hand side here. So whether it's whether it's both or whether it's either one, will equate to 1. So if this is 1, this is 0, it'll equate to 1. If this is 1 and that's 1, I'll just quickly eraser. If that's 1 and 1, that's 1. If they're both 0, then it will be 0. So basically, that's going to be used either this or this. If any of those are true, then the value, then then it is true. Then we have what we call our nots. So a not is essentially it's just a flip. So if you have a true, it'll basically flip to false. Now this is really handy because flipping with not is actually sometimes you can refactor your code to be more efficient and it's easier to read than to actually have, for example, an if-else statement. So for example, let's use for a not example. And let's say you're testing a file path. So if you've got test path, so we have test path. Test path naturally evaluates to be true. So essentially, test path is a Boolean function. Is a Boolean commandlet. So essentially, if the path exists, it's true. If it doesn't, it's false. So what we can do is, if we've got our condition here, so we've got our if statement and we've got our condition in here. If we don't want to particularly have, we want to have the opposite of that. So if the path doesn't exist, we can actually just append a not to it. So you can see here, I've just got a not, and I basically appended it to the front and then stuck it inside of parentheses. What that basically does is it'll flip the output. So if it's true, it'll flip to false, and if it's false, it'll flip to true. And that's really handy because it means that then basically you can simplify your code. So you're not dependent on an else statement. So you can shrink your code and makes it a lot easier to read. So that's just a really cool way of thinking about it. So nots are very, very cool. Finally, we use XORs. XORs are generally, I very rarely need to use XORs, but they're always handy to know. So essentially an XOR is the same as an OR. The only difference is if we look at the truth table, so obviously this one is the same, this one is the same, this one's the same. The only one that's different is this one here. So if both inputs here is 1, then the output is 0. So that's the only difference between an XOR and an OR table, where an OR table would equate both 1s to be a 1, and XOR would actually equate both 1s to be a 0. So if they're both true, then it's false. If either one is true, then it's true. If none of them are true, then it's false. So that's essentially our basic logic gates and basic logic gates. So if you've got any questions, throw them in the chat. It's all good. So the next thing we're going to quickly cover is, just quickly jump back on the thing, is we're going to talk about, obviously we just quickly talk about Booleans. So Booleans, similar to what we just talked about there, is basically you have true, false, it's the equivalent of a 1, or it's the equivalent of a 0. So it's pretty straightforward. So these, so anything that evaluates to be a Boolean function, so if any commandlet evaluates to be a Boolean, so for example, test path, it's really hard to write. Essentially, test path would, since it evaluates to a Boolean, you can actually do you can do cool things with it. Now, one of the things that's really important with PowerShell is PowerShell naturally evaluates to true. So I could just go if test path here, and I know that test path evaluates to be true. So I can then put my code in here. So that's basically Booleans. I'm not really going to go any further with that, but essentially it's just a 1 or a 0. It's at its base. All right, next slide. PowerShell comparison operators. So let's get stuck into it. So we're going to talk about equality operators. Now, there's going to be some questions there if you guys are watching. You're going to probably ask with regards to case literal. We'll talk about that towards the end, because if I did include this would double the slide deck. So essentially, we're going to be looking at equality operators. So equals. So equals is denoted by -eq. So any sort of operator is not, in traditional programming, is denoted by an equals or a greater than or a less than, those kinds of things. Operators are defined, equality operators or any sort of operators is defined by a hyphen and an actual, the operator name. So we have equals, which is obviously equals, and then A is equal to A. So that's actually true. That'll evaluate to be true. We'll talk about, by default, PowerShell's case insensitive, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Not equals. So not equals, obviously, if it doesn't, if the two values don't actually match. So obviously B is not equal to A. That's just not possible. We then have the greater than. So greater than basically is 2 is greater than 1. That will evaluate to be true. So true 2 is greater than 1. Then we have less than. So less than is basically, again, is 1 is less than 2. Now, the really cool things about this in PowerShell is that actually PowerShell does this natively for date time. I'll just put an I in there. So if you have a date time, you can actually pass two date time types together and say, you know, is today greater than yesterday? No, it's not. Is tomorrow greater than today? Yes, it is. It actually is capable of doing that. So that's something that's really quite cool. All right, just make sure we are good. Yes, sweet, cool. All right, so the next thing is we have obviously greater than or equal to. So essentially 2 is greater than or equal to 1. It's also 2 GE to 2 is also will evaluate to be true because it's greater or equal to. So 2 is greater or is equal to 2. So, and that corresponds to less equal. So 1 is less equal to 2. And again, if we said 1 is So that's it. Let's just squiggle that out. We say 1 is less equal to 1, then that'll evaluate to be true as well. So that's that. That's the equality operators. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into a demo. If I can quickly get out of this and open up Visual Studio Code. There we go. All right, so let's have a quick look at our equality operators. Just get rid of that. So, equality operators. So we're just going to quickly jump through here. This is going to be really quick because it's generally fairly straightforward. So this is going to equate to true. So string is equal to string. They're literally the same. Then we have string is equal to string. That's the same. In fact, you can actually change the case sensitivity and it will still work. So it still evaluates to be true. 1 is not equal to string. This is technically true. It'll actually, oh sorry, I got ahead of myself. So 1 is equal to string. That's false. The reason why is obviously you have an integer 1, then you have a string. Now let's have a quick look at dot equals. Sorry. Okay, so not equals. String is not equal to this is a string. That's 100% true because string and this is a string are completely different. String is not equal to 1. That's also going to evaluate to be true because they're two different types. And string is not equal to string. This is actually false. They're the same. So that's basically equality. The equality for comparison. Greater than. So 2 is greater than 1. Obviously that's true. 1 is greater than 2. That's false. That's pretty straightforward. If I go 2 is greater than 2, that will be false. Same for 1 is less than 2, that's going to be true. 2 is less than 1, that's going to be false. If 1 is less than 1, that's going to be false. You can see there, that's false. Oh, I just ran 2 at the same time. So that's basically less than. Now we've got greater or equal to. So 2 is greater or equal to 2, which is true. 2 is greater or equal to than 1, that's false. Oh, actually, hang on. Oh, sorry, no, that's true because it's greater than 1. And 1 is greater or equal to than 2, that's false. Vice versa, 2 is less or equal to than 2, that's going to be true. 1 is less equal to 2, that's true. And 2 is less equal than 1, that's going to be false. So that's equality operators, that's pretty straightforward. So I'm just flying through this because we've got to cover this pretty quickly. So equality operators, done. Matching. So matching. So matching comparisons. So we have what we call the like operator, and the like operator essentially is your wildcard lookup. So a lot of people get this confused with match. Like and match generally get confused. People think they're the same. They're not. They're different. They have similar. They can do similar things, but essentially one's a string based and another's a regex based. So essentially, ABC is like B. This will equate to be true since PowerShell is case insensitive, and B is basically and the operator is looking ahead and B it's looking ahead and behind B. So essentially, it will fall within that. So what you obviously back in the command prompt days, any sort of wildcard is denoted by an asterisk. And so basically, if you want it to look ahead of a string, you specify it after it. And if you want to look at the value before the string, or behind the string, then basically place it before. So this can be really handy. So for example, if you're looking for a specific file name, for example, a specific file extension that has a same kind of name, like if we don't know, you could say we'll just say, like for example, let's just say exe. We could say star xe. So it's going to get us everything with star xe looking behind it. So essentially, exe will pop up in there, and we will get our we will have our values. So that's basically the wildcard operator. Like I said, the asterisks denote how the function is to look up, how to actually look it up, how to where to look. So essentially, if it's in front of the string, it's going to look forward. If it's behind it, it's going to look backwards. That's essentially that. Done. All right, so the next one is not like. So essentially it's a negative wildcard. So exact same process, but basically it's not like. So not, obviously, if we think back to our not gate, it's exactly the same thing. It's a flip on the like. So essentially, if it doesn't exist, then it's true. If it does exist, it's false. So in this instance, ABC is not like 1. That will evaluate to be true. If it was not like here, it would evaluate to be false, because we'll just drag that like that. The reason why is because we're flipping the output. So the output would be not. Therefore, it would reverse. So whatever's true is false, whatever's false is true. Alrighty, so let's erase all things. Again, we now have match. Now, match is basically really used for regex. So if you're familiar with regex, or regular expressions, so basically it's really used to do regex lookups. So essentially, I've just got here ABC matches AZ. That will match to be true. Now, the reason why is AZ is basically a regex pattern that basically says any character between that is within any alphabetical character will evaluate to true. And obviously these are all alphabetical characters. It'll evaluate to be true. Now, we can say here, for example, with not match, we can do this. So essentially, this will evaluate to be true because we've got this. I've literally forgotten what it is now. I didn't write. Actually, I might have written a note on it. Let me have a quick look. I literally forgot what it was. Okay, I can't remember what it was. Oh, I can't remember what the regex pattern is. Give me 2 seconds. Let me just quickly jump on the regex cheat sheet. I'll have a quick look. Regex is definitely not my strong point, but it's still yep. What is it? It's a 1, 2, 3. Okay, so basically what this says is it's one character not of this. So essentially what I'm saying is not this. And no alphabetical characters. That's essentially what that's saying. I totally forgot. Regex is definitely not my strong thing. Anyway, so that's basically that. All right, so there's going to be a few more. Let's just raise ink on slide. So next one, containment. Oh, actually, do I? No, that's right. So now we have containment. So containment's basically how we can actually use we can do comparisons on arrays and objects. So essentially it's arrays and collections, but we can do objects. I wouldn't recommend it. Now what we can do here is essentially we have a contain. So basically array contains values. So using the contains, arrays contains value. So as an example here we have an array and it contains 1 and equals true. I've just totally forgot I was supposed to go do some demos. All right, I'm going to do some demos right once we finish this. Sorry. And that equates to be true. So essentially contains, this is not contained, sorry. Let me just quickly fix that. And show discard. I'll just quickly go containment, not contains. Okay, so not contains, basically the array doesn't contain the value. So essentially, if the value is not in the array, it's fine. So, so we can see here, the way that I kind of think about this is basically from a DBA perspective, is basically you have, can I draw with a laser pointer? Nope. So you have your many, and then you have your 1. So basically, contains works with a many to one relationship. Works with having a many on your left side and then a one on your right side. So essentially, you can see here the value 1 is in the array, so it will equal true. 4 is sorry, I've got to fix this again because I didn't do this right. Let me resume. So essentially, not contains. You can see here we've got an array of 1, 2, 3, and it not contains 4. So obviously 4 doesn't exist in this array, therefore it'll equate to true because it's the not will flip the result. So essentially, that's a not contains. The next part is we have the in. So the in is the complete opposite. You have a 1 to a many relationship, and it works exactly the same. So basically, 1 is in an array of 1, 2, 3. That'll equate to true. 4 is not in array 1, 2, 3. That's going to be true because it's not in that array. So essentially, that's pretty much that. So it's pretty straightforward. So I'm just going to quickly go to the next slide. So the best way to think about containment, this is the way like I was saying before, is that we have the contain statement. I should have just done that. So the contain statement basically on the left hand side is your many, so that will be your array or your collection, and on the right hand side you have your 1. Versus in, you'd have your 1 on the left hand side, and on the right hand side you have your many. So yeah, it's essentially it's exactly the same as having a less than. We'll say this is a greater than or a less than. It's essentially the same thing. We're just basically flipping the two sides. That's basically it. So let's go do some demos. So what we need to demo, because I kind of jumped the gun here, is we're going to need to demo containment and matching. So let's jump back in here. Keep confusing Waterfox for Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're just going to have a string like so. We're going to go so what we're going to do here is we're just going to do these. Okay, so if we run this, string matches ABC. I think actually no, it's lowercase. Is it? I think because it's I think I need to go back to my demo. Whoops. Just quickly run this. Yes, okay, cool. Okay, so that should evaluate to be true. Regex always muddles me, so I'm kind of just want to quickly check. Okay, that's weird. I think, okay, I'm having some regex issues here, but we can sort them out. We're just going to jump on the cheat sheet. So essentially we have matching. So matching basically, we can just look at a string and we can match it with some regex. So essentially here, we're just saying, like I said, any sort of letter. So we can basically just say, yep, match. You can see down there it evaluates to true. Now, if I actually do this, 1, 2, 3, this is going to be interesting because I don't know what PowerShell is going to do here. I think it's going to evaluate to be false, but it depends if PowerShell actually converts it. I think it'll evaluate to false. Yeah, there we go. And the reason why is because that's an alphanumeric, so that'll evaluate to be false. Now, we can actually flip these two. So if we basically say not match here, this will evaluate to be true because it's an integer. So it's basically just essentially flipping it. And this will evaluate to be false because it does match. So if we run that, yep, you can see there that evaluates to be false. So essentially, that's just some it's just more used for regex. Now, if you're not familiar with regex, I'm generally very green to regex. It's something that I have to go visit every day. Regex 101 is really good. This is generally, I kind of spend a lot of my time in here, and I'll just be playing around in regex. So essentially, you can just write your regular expression up top. So we'll just write our expression. So we're just going to call it string. And then we can actually do our regex expression. So we can just say AZ. And then actually case it into something. And you can see there was 6 matches because there's 6 characters. So essentially, if we did 1, 2, 3, there's no matches. So very handy tool, regex101.com. All right, now we're going to talk about containment. So I'm just going to go ahead and save that, and we're going to talk about containment. So if we run this first statement here, that's obviously going to evaluate to be true because because the array contains 1. Whereas this will evaluate to be false because the array doesn't contain 6. So the array contains number 6. So like I said, remember, many on the left, 1 on the right. So if we basically flip it now, so if we say, let's just grab this again, and we just basically say not contains, essentially we're just flipping the bit. So here we've got, this will evaluate to be false because it not contains 1. So it basically will flip the bit, which means it will actually evaluate to be false. So you can see there that's evaluated to be false. The following one we have here is not contains 6. So this will evaluate to be true because the number 6, the array doesn't not contain 6. So essentially, if you think about it from a contains, take the contains, yes, it's 6, it's not there because it's not contains, flip it. So flip the output. So that'll be true. So essentially, it's true. So you can use things like, you can use those kinds of things to basically refactor your code. So a really good example of the reason why not so good to refactor your code, I'll just use a quick test path example, like I said, because this helps articulate. So traditionally people will do something like this. Whoops. Do something. So our main code's here. Now essentially, rather than doing that, we can actually flip it. So let's say that there's nothing in here. Nothing in here. Well, then we just flip it, so we don't actually need this piece of code. So then we can just go if not test path, literal path, see Windows. Then we only need 1 script block. So it just simplifies that code. Now it's really handy inside of loops. The reason why is because let's say you have an if statement here. Let's just actually just take this kind of approach. It can start looking really messy, but let's say you only need to test whether the path exists. If it doesn't, you just need to loop to the next item. Well, it looks a little messy if you have not, like, even if you have a tiny bit of code here. So we say we have a tiny bit of code here, where basically where the item exists, and then we have, you know, a little bit of, actually no, we'll say there's a tiny bit of, let's say let's say we have a tiny bit of code here. And then basically we have, let's say we're going to skip it, so we're just going to continue. skip and what we can do here, so we got main code, let's just call this main code. So what we do here is actually rewrite this this loop so that it's actually implicitly true. And what I mean by that is we can take this loop, refactor the code, and then all we need to do is we basically say not say test path literal path /Windows, and then we can break it, and then from this point forward everything is implicitly true. So everything here is now implicitly true, which means then we've actually simplified our code, so we don't actually have to write we don't have to write more. We don't have to nest code, and we don't have to nest code more than we need to. So essentially, if it's false, and then basically after that it's implicitly true. So that's basically a really good example. I'm actually going to keep that there. So the next one we want to quickly talk about is in. So in is exactly the same as contains. So in, so we're going to say 1 is in. Sorry, I'm just going to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's going to be true. 1 is, we'll say 6 is in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's going to be false. So essentially, the value 1 is in the array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's going to evaluate to be true down the bottom there. And then we have the next one, which is 6. 6 is in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, it's not. So if we run that, we can see that that's false. So that's a really good one. So essentially, let's grab these values again. Let's not them. Rerun them. That's going to be false, obviously, because it's not in. We're looking for values that are not in the array. So 6 is not in the array, therefore return true. So that's essentially your ins and not ins. That is pretty much that for those two demos. So like I said, the best way to visualize it is you have your many contains, so many to one. So think of it as the array contains a value. So one value, for 1. That's the best way I kind of think of it, or a one to many, a many to one relationship. Where you have a one to many relationship, it's one value in an array. So that's how I visualize it. Essentially, yeah. So you have a many to one, so there's your many. How do you draw? Yeah, you draw a many like that, and obviously a many like that. So that's essentially containment. Let's clear all ink. Let's move on. Replacement. Okay. Now this is actually really cool. Replacement. You can actually replace conditions. You can do replacement in as an operator in PowerShell. Now, the biggest thing with this replacement versus the method replace. So there's a method replace on every string. That's res, not re. There's a dot replace string that you probably see me use. The difference is basically the replace string is string literal, basically meaning it doesn't. If you have any sort of like regex or anything, it'll interpret it as a string. It won't interpret it as regex. Now that's really important because if you basically have a really good example is there was a client that we worked for that basically had square brackets in their file directories, and the script was interpreting the files, the text inside the square brackets as regex. And because it was doing that, basically there was a lot of issues trying to handle that. So essentially we moved to the replace method, but you can still do cool things with it. So obviously here we've got hello world replace hello with hi, and it will basically do hi world. Very basic. That's on its most basic level, but like I said, it does regex. So we can basically replace what this basically says. /b is a word boundary. So where anywhere there's a word boundary, add a hyphen to it. So essentially, I've just said put a hyphen there, put a hyphen there, and then it looks like that. So essentially, that's how you do a string replace. To be honest, it's actually not going to be uppercase, it's going to be lowercase. That's incorrect. So it'll just be a lowercase hello world. But that's replacement. So let's have a quick look demo at that. So the value that you're wanting to search for is the first element in the condition, or the parameter. So in this instance, we're just going to search for hello. And then after the comma, we basically are specifying, so obviously for the second parameter, we're specifying hi. That's the value to replace it with. So if we go ahead and run that, you can see that down here, we now have a hi world. So that's pretty, fairly straightforward. But let's do that actual cool thing with some regex. So we can actually do the same thing. And what we're going to do now is we're going to say to them, I want a word boundary. So if we go back to, it's actually the other slide. We're saying we want a word boundary, and we're going to replace it with a hyphen. So if we go ahead and run that, you can see there we've got hello hyphen space world. So you can do whatever you want with it. It's really quite handy. But essentially, you can do regex based string replace. So if you need to kind of clean something up, you can do it in here. Essentially, that is the replace. So the next one is type. Okay, so there's a type one as well, which is, this is like one of the ones I love actually. I actually use this quite a bit. Is the is and not is operator, and basically the is returns true if the objects are the same. So this is a good example. You've got this as a string because it's an actual string quote. And then we have using the is operator, and we're actually saying type string. So you can see there we're actually using the square brackets, and we're saying this is a type string, and it's equal to true. So that will basically equivalent to will equal true. Now, obviously, not's exactly this. What it is exactly the same. This is a string, is not an integer. That's 100% true because it's a string. Therefore, it'll be true. So let's go ahead and quickly demo that. Didn't actually have it. That's all right. So let's just put a string in here. This is our string. Now you use this for various reasons. One of the things I had to use this for was to actually test an object type, whether it was a PowerShell object or whether it was a hash table, because I wrote a function that could test the property of a hash table. So, it could test the key of a hash table if it existed, or it tested an object property to see if it existed. So because of that, it needed to be able to differentiate between the two because they operate differently. You have objects that have properties, and you have hash tables that have key values. Key items. So this was really handy to deal with that. So if we denote a string, like so, if we run that, we can see that that equates to be true. If we actually say that this is an integer, and then rerun it, you can see it's false. Now let's use not is, is not. So if we run this bad boy, it's going to be false. It's not is because it is a string. It's not a string. It's looking for a string. It's looking for anything but a string. So so if we say an integer, for example, that will equate to be true. So yeah, really quite handy. So that's essentially your is and is nots. Very, very, very straightforward. Cool. All right, we are making good progress, and we are nearly on the first hour, so we are doing really, really well. So now I want to quickly talk about the C and the I prefix. We talked about it initially, and I kind of going to want to come back to this and actually really talk about it. So essentially, like I said, PowerShell is case insensitive. So where VBScript was case sensitive, so if you had A is equal to A in VBScript, that is false. In PowerShell, no, they're the same. It's case insensitive. This is by default. So essentially, lowercase abc is the same as an uppercase abc. It's just thing. Now, if you need to do a case sensitive match, you're gonna see operators prefixed with a C. So let's have a quick look at that. We're just gonna, what's it called? So if we go, this is a string, and then we use CEQ. So using this the case sensitive prefix, we can basically say this is a string. So they're exactly the same if it was a normal equal operator. We're actually going to quickly do that, just so you guys can see it. So you can see that evaluates to be true down the bottom. So now if we run this, but we're doing case sensitive matching, it's going to evaluate to be false. So essentially that's basically using the C. Using case sensitive matching. So essentially that's case sensitive matching. Pretty much every operator has an equivalent case sensitive match. Now it's kind of hilarious though, because some of them just don't need it, but excuse me, they're there. Now PowerShell also has, for some reason, I don't know why, I think it's to do because the way the culture is set. We'll talk about that in a moment. So you have a case insensitive match. Now this is explicit, so remember this is an explicit. So if we do the same thing and we use the I, so again, if we run the first one, we know that it's going to evaluate to be true, even regardless of case. This is going to evaluate to be true because it's an explicit case insensitive match. So this suggests that there is a possibility that the culture, the case, the case sensitivity can be adjusted to be sensitive or insensitive. I haven't seen it yet, so, but it's just worth noting that they exist. You don't need to really use IEQ. You might need to use CEQ if you're doing a case sensitive match. So for example, if you're matching, I don't know, like a password, to be honest, you'd be matching hashes, but you'd be still, it could be something like that. So that's basically case insensitive and case sensitive matching. Alrighty. Questions. So I'm just gonna, we've got 10 minutes, so I'm gonna kind of slow down a bit, which is really good. We're gonna open the floor for questions. Fire away. You can obviously fire away on Discord as well if you're on Discord, which is always easy. We can go from there. So if you want to ask questions in Discord, just chat them to me in the the random channel. So I'll just give you guys about a minute or two to kind of think of some questions, and then we'll keep cracking on. Okay, what we're going to do, we're going to just leave it for a little bit. We've got a couple of minutes, so I'm just going to jump AFK for a second. I'm going to grab a drink of water. You guys can stand up, have a stretch, and what we can do is we'll take a quick 2-minute break, and we will be back, and we'll crack on with the next segment. So I'll be back in 2 minutes. Alrighty, we've got another minute, so I'm just going to have a quick moment, and then we'll keep cracking on. Alrighty. Okay. Alrighty. We're going to get started in 5 seconds. Alright, that's 2 minutes. Let's get cracking into PowerShell and filtering. Okay, so this is probably going to be one of the more really intensive parts of the course. The reason why is because this is predominantly a lot of bread. This is one of the pieces of fundamentals that PowerShell people use a lot. This is the bread and butter of making PowerShell very, very useful. So we're going to be exploring a whole bunch of different commandlets. Now there was one I omitted from the list, the where method. The reason why is because I think it's a little bit too advanced for this specific course, so I've kind of left it out. But essentially, it's still, it's essentially the same as what we call where object. But there's other really, really powerful features within it that make where object just absolutely leave it in its dust. So we're going to teach you guys the essentials so you guys can get running, up and running. So let's get stuck into it. So first things first, my most used command, I reckon, probably be where object in the pipeline. Where object. So obviously, like I said, all this is on the there's URLs about so each of these have its corresponding URLs. All this information is pulled from Microsoft's site. So MSDN, I think. MSDN? TechNet. Oh, I can't remember. What's it on? What's on the thing? It's docs.microsoft.com, so it's actually Microsoft documentation. All right, so where object. So basically, where object is the ability to filter an input from a pipeline, so the PowerShell pipeline. So essentially, you can take a collection of data and filter it. So think of it as, it's a really bad analogy because get80user already has the ability to filter natively. But let's say, for example, you want to get, you got your 80user and you want to filter it by the account state. So you want to filter and get all the disabled accounts. So you would then go, you would actually use where object to do that. Now, there's a more efficient way of doing it because you can actually do that within get80user. But essentially, we'll just go with this example for the moment. So the biggest thing that where object that most people are going to see in the scripts is that if they're writing a script initially, they're going to be if they're using the aliases, it's going to be noted with a $sign or a where. They won't actually write full where object. I reckon if you just write full where object every time, you're never going to have an issue. But don't write aliases in production code. Now, I don't even because I use tab complete in PowerShell. Essentially, it doesn't really matter for me. Type where, hit tab, and it's going to come where object. So, yeah, you kind of are taking a bit of a shortcut with $, but essentially, yeah. So there's 3 ways that you can really use where object. I kind of wanted to talk about each of those, but essentially the 2 big ones. There's 2 main ways to use it. So essentially the first one is here, and the second one's here. So basically we have initially you have where object, you have the parameter input object, and the filter script. Anytime you see an input object, essentially what you're doing there is this is a pipeable. So you could have, like we see here, you have collection, pipe, where object, expression. So essentially we don't need to specify the parameters, we just basically need to write it. Now, it's kind of funny because where object's one of those ones that people just kind of don't actually omit the parameters, because essentially it's not really relevant, because basically the condition or the logic within it's actually the important part of it. So it's kind of funny though, because generally speaking, everyone says make sure you put all your full parameter names in PowerShell for your commandlets, but as where object, I've been actually just kind of thinking about it, and I was thinking, no, I actually don't do that. So that's just one of those things. So let's actually take a look at where object and why it's so cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into our demo, and we're going to use get process. Get process is the greatest tool for this, because it's just an easy one that people can follow with in their own time, and then go and it doesn't require any sort of admin permissions or anything like that. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to start up Paint. Now I know the executable is mspaint.exe. That's just the go-to, all right? But we're just going to, for this instance, we don't know that. We know it's Paint. We don't know it's MS Paint. So we're just going to kind of go on with this scenario. So we're going to start. So you can see here, I can just go ahead and run it. And from that, we're going to basically have MS Paint is started, and we are. So essentially, we're going to do get process, like we always do in our demos. And I want you guys to make sure you guys get familiar with this command, because this is the command we're going to pretty much default to every time. So we've got get process. Essentially, we've now got all our processes and we're piping it to where object. So we're going to go where object. As you can see, I just started typing where. We'll do that again. Where, and then I just hit enter. There's where object. And there's different ways we can write this, but essentially we're going to say well, actually, yeah, we're going to say the property name name. So if we just wanted to quickly suss that out, so what we can do here is we just go get process, and we're going to go out grid view. Let's just do out grid view so we can see that. That's why I'm running PowerShell 6. It doesn't support out grid view. That's fine. Sorry, I got a very itchy nose. We'll just run it in PowerShell IC. So we just run into out grid view, and we're going to be looking at the process name. I think it's process. It's just process. And then we're just going to run a quick get member, because I want to have a look at the properties. So we're looking for the property name that's going to contain paint. So I'm pretty sure it's name. I could be wrong. I am wrong. It's actually process name. So we're looking for the process name. So property. We're going to be using the process name property. So what we're going to say is process name is equivalent to. Actually, no, we're not going to say that. That's too easy. We're going to say like, and we're going to say paint. We don't know if there's a .exe on the end, so we're just going to look forward and look backwards. We're just going to do it that way. So if we go ahead and run that, you can see there's our object. There's our paint object. So we're just going to pop that in a variable, and let's lock that in. So we've got that locked into a variable. We can have a look at it. We can see all the information that's in there. I just ran a format list, FYI. I just used an FL because I'm just kind of cheating for a sec. But essentially, that's all our information about paint. Now, the process name is MS Paint. So we can be like, okay, let's refactor this code. So rather than saying paint, let's actually say MS Paint. Let's like so. So we're not going to use the like operator anymore. We're going to use the equals operator because we want to explicitly get that type. So if we rerun it, it works exactly the same, but we're now not looking forward and back. This is really good because you might have something else that has paint in it. I don't know what if an executable had anything with an executable of paint, maybe Paint Shop Pro. I haven't heard that in a while. That just kind of came to mind. But essentially, that's that. So let's have another quick look at another one. So let's say, let's look at another way to actually do this. So this is the way I personally do it. This is from the old PowerShell days. So this is basically the old school way of doing it. It's each to your own and how you write this. Predominantly, every person writes it differently. So let's say we go get process, where object, and then I'm just going to specify a script block key. And essentially, I can actually write $_. Now, $_ is the representation of the current object within the pipeline. So in this instance, it'll be where object is running, it's actually iterating through each object in the pipeline. So what we can do here is we can say that's the current object in that collection in the pipeline. And then we can go .process name, so you can actually see it fill it out there. We're going to say is equal to MS Paint. So that's just another way we're going to do it. So if we run this, we're going to get the same output. Now, one of the reasons why a lot of people use this, and I find it's a little easier to understand. So let's actually write a where object query. That's a basic. Let's write a very interesting one. So what we're going to do here is we're going to get process, and we're just going to have a look at the data. So what I'm looking at is okay. We're going to basically get any process that has a CPU value above let's say 10%. Actually, let's just say 5%. And let's have also a look at what's in there. I'll just see the get member. And let's have a look at any system file that's in C system Windows System 32 that basically has a process over 10%. Let's just do that. So So first thing we need to do is obviously we need to suss out what's each of these values. So what I'm going to quickly do is work out, we're going to actually just store that in a variable. And then I'm going to index into the first object. The reason why is I want to see the values. And then we're going to use format list to kind of just get me the information. And then I'm just going to say everything. And we're seeing now. This is interesting because does that have a CPU value? It doesn't. Interesting. So some of them have null in a CPU. So that's something we're going to need to cater for. So there's no value there. So if I just do an A10, so we're getting the 10th item in the A collection, and we have a look at that, we can see there's a little bit more information about that. Okay, cool. So we're going to use the path property. So we are going to use the path property. We're going to use the, where's the CPU property? There we go. We're going to use the CPU property. Like so. All right, now we have a little bit of information. We actually can start writing our query. So first thing we need to do is obviously write get process here. And now we're going to pipe it to where object. Now, what we need to do here is we actually need to write it, cater for a few things. CPU, the CPU property can be null. We can see that there because if we looked at the first item, and let's actually just look at that property. So I've gone back to the first item down the bottom here, and I'm going to CPU. There's no response. There's nothing there. But if we go to the 10th, there's a value. So we can actually check to see if this is null by actually doing that test. So I'm just going to say equals null. It's true. So what we're going to write here is we're going to write a bit of a query. We're going to actually write a giant AND query. So that needs to satisfy 3 conditions for it to be true. The first condition is it cannot be null. The second condition is it, okay, we're going to I'll quickly take a step back and we're going to talk about why I'm doing a null in a sec, but I just kind of want to, we'll just quickly talk about this first. So the 3 conditions, it's got to be null, it's got to be over 10%, and it's got to have, it's got to be part of the C Windows System 32 directory. Now, that said, the reason why we're testing to see whether it's null or not, this kind of comes back to experience. If there's an issue with your code, so for example, let's say you're testing a large amount of collections and one of those collections has a weird anomaly in it. So like, for example, this is its null. Now, essentially a null value is not the end of the world when it comes to testing, but there are some times when conditional operators will have issues. So let's say user contains, for example. So if you try and do a null contains, I'm pretty sure that throws a terminating error. Now, the way to get around that is you actually add the condition check, that condition check to the very first item in the AND series. So is it null? Now, what will happen is when PowerShell evaluates it, it doesn't evaluate the entire string. It only evaluates sequentially. So what it means is that it'll check to see if it's null. Okay, it's null. Stop. It will emit the result. It won't need to evaluate the rest because it knows that it's already null. If it sees an AND there, it will just validate that it's null. So it means that you can actually write conditional logic in there without actually having to do any filtering and let the where object do the filtering for you. So it's quite handy for that. So let's write our object. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to be using our parentheses. So you see here I've just dropped in 3 parentheses, and we're going to just add. I'm just going to put that back there. So we're going to add our 3 parentheses. Each of those parentheses is going to contain its operators. So our first one is we're actually testing is the CPU. So $_ current object in the collection that's in the pipeline. We're then going to go CPU, and we're going to say is here, we're going to say not equals null. So the value cannot anything but null. So if it's null, it'll evaluate to be false. If it's anything else but null, it'll evaluate to be true. So that gets around our first thing. Now we're using the AND operator because we need all these values to be true for the result to exist. If any of them are not true, then what will happen is basically we'll get items, for example, with, let's use an example, we'll have values that are above 50% that are not in the system32 directory, and we'll have also other values that are below 50, that are above 10% that are in the that are not in the system32 directory. But we can also have values that are in the system32 directory that are below 10%. So essentially, AND is basically combining those two operators together. So now we're going to write the CPU is greater or equal to 0.1. I don't know what 10% is. I don't know how it evaluates what its upper 35. I'm just going to do something. We're going to go a.cpu. I'm just going to have a look. Okay, we're just going to say is greater or equal to than 10. The reason why you can see like 176 and things like that is because they're pretty sure they're using multiple cores. So I don't know. I feel like I need to go check that, but we can just, for the sake of this demo, we'll just go with it. So you think that it's above 10. So the next thing we need to do is basically we need to go, okay, so we've got our item, and we now need to check the path. So the path will basically be like. We're going to be using the like. We don't know essentially the file name. We don't really care about the file name. All we need to do is know that the Windows System 32 directory is its path. So if we go C Windows System 32, oops, and then we actually specify the look ahead wildcard here, that will basically say any file name, any directory, anything on the right hand side, as long as that left hand side is true, then it will be true. So let's go ahead and run this and let's see what we get. There we go. So we've got svchost.exe. That's a system32. That's a system32. We've got the runtime broker and we've got SI host. I have no idea what these are, so let's go and I know what SVC host is, so let's go and have a look at it. So we're just going to results. This is actually just for some reason it's gotten dirt slow. That's fine. I'm just going to copy that and we'll restart PowerShell as well. Let's quickly restart PowerShell. So essentially, we go ahead and run that. Let's have a look at our results. We're just going to go path, and there are all our paths. So we can see there we've got different file names, different executables. They could be anything. There could be subdirectories within System32. It doesn't matter. It's part of it. That means that it evaluates. So that's a really good example of using where object as an expanded thing. One moment, I'm just getting a phone call. I will just quickly go AFK for a sec. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. So essentially that's a really good example of using a where object. So I'm not going to go any further with that because we just spent 15 minutes on that and I've got a lot of other ones to go through. So let's jump back into our slide deck. Oops, I just hit presenter view. I need to go point options, erase a link on slide. All right, next item. So what's our next one? Group object. So essentially group object groups objects according to this that contains the same property value. So group objects really used in when you need to kind of put different objects together essentially to do different things. So a really good example is with one of my most recent projects, I needed to group users that had duplicate or that had Active Directory users that had the same name. The display name, it could have been the display name, it could have been the SAM account name, it could have been the CN name. Essentially, they were grouped. And so this is something that's actually quite interesting because group object is, you have to do a lot more work to be able to do that grouping. But essentially, essentially the reason why we needed that information is because we needed to consolidate those accounts. So those accounts, essentially, we needed to find them. So this is actually a really good example of grouping that specific person together and then having all that subdata. So that subdata is still available. So for example, let's think about an Active Directory object in PowerShell. Those objects would just exist as a collection within that specific group, that specific object. So we're actually going to look at that. We're going to look at an example of that. But essentially, group object, you group your object, you group it on your property name, and that's pretty much it. It's very basic. There's a few other things that you can do with it, but essentially, I kind of want to keep it quite basic. So essentially, you have your collection. Obviously, a big pipe there. Group object, property name. So let's have a quick look at that in demo. So what we're going to do, we're actually going to start up multiple instances of MS Paint. So I'm just going to go MS Paint. So we're going to have multiple instances of MS Paint started up. So we're going to group object based on the property, and we're going to say name. Actually, we don't need to specify the $_ we just need, actually no, sorry, it's not name, it's process name. So we're going to specify the process name. Now, what this is going to do, if we just hit F8, now I have paint splayed across all my screens. We actually should have 4. Is there 4 instances or 3? There's 4 instances because we didn't close down the previous one. So now what we can do here is if we go in Paint and we've got, sorry, I'm just thinking out loud here for a sec. We're going to group on process name. Process name was what we used previously. So now if we go ahead and run this, actually just going to grab this, jump into group object and chuck it in here. So we're actually keeping our demos separate. We go have a look at grouped objects. You can see here we've got a whole bunch of different information in here. So I'm just going to scroll up. You can see here we've got the count. So the count basically represents the number of grouped values within there. So we can see we've got 11 for conhost. We've got our process name, which is the property that we specified, and then the group. And the group data is basically denotes the values that the objects that are grouped in there. So we can see in here we have MS Paint, and there's 4 instances in there. So what we can do is let's actually write a where object. So let's use where object to get the same ones. So what we can do is we can go grouped objects. We're just going to go equals, and then we're going to go grouped objects, where object, and then we're going to say $_ current property, which will be in the object, which will be each of these. So we're going to use count, and we're going to say .count is not equal, because we don't want it to be equal 1. Now it's not going to equal 0 because then it just won't exist, but anything but 1, which means essentially all values. We could actually say greater than 1. We could actually just do greater than 1. There's probably a better way to say it. So let's just do that instead. So what we can do is say run that. Now if we dump it out, if we have a look at that variable again, we can see now we've got a filtered list. You can see here we've got some other really random things in here, which is really interesting because like Galaxy Client, I think that's my Fun Galaxy card. Fantastic. And other things. But we're just focusing on MS Paint. So let's have a look at MS Paint. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to have a look at it. So what we're going to do is we're going to then refilter. We're just going to do this again. We're going to say name is equal to MS Paint, like so. What we're going to do also is we're going to basically just call this grouped MS Paint objects, like so. So now if we go to group MS Paint objects, you can see now we have just the MS Paint. And now we want to have a look at the data. So essentially what we have here is if we actually use the group property, because remember, this is a collection, this is an object. There's only one object in this, therefore it's an object. This is a collection, so let's just keep that in mind. So now I can specify the group property, and there's all my instances of that. And this is actually really quite cool, is that all the data is still preserved within that. So all the process data within that is preserved. So let's just index into the first value and do a format list star, and you can see it's all still there. So that's basically group object. Essentially, it's really quite powerful. It's very useful, and it's really good to know. So let's go to the next one. I'm just going to quickly Alt-Tab, save that so we can keep it for the demo slides. Compare objects. So this one is finicky. It's not something I use every day. I have written a function which basically uses this extensively, but it's just something I don't really use. Now, what compare object does is it essentially just compares two sets of objects side by side. So the first object on the left-hand side is essentially called the reference. The second object on the right-hand side is called the difference. Now you're seeing these weird things here. We're going to quickly talk about that in a sec. The result of comparison shows the difference. So what I mean by that is on the if it's only in the left-hand side, it's basically denoted by an arrow pointing left. Now there's no like, don't think of it as a greater than or anything like that. It's an arrow. Think of it as an arrow. If it's pointing left, it's going to our reference object. If it's pointing right, it's going to our difference object. And if you see an equals, now you have to specify the include equals parameter. They're the same. So let's say you want to compare a text file, something like that. That's a really good example. So I'm just going to quickly expand on this. There's some other little bits and pieces that are really quite handy to know. So essentially, we have compare object continue. So continue, just kind of looking at this. Well, Bub's just must have bumped her head. So obviously there's a whole bunch of different other parameters. I'm kind of going to, obviously we talk about that. Yes, that's in the next slide. Cool. So essentially you have compare object, you have our reference object. Now that can be piped in, so you can pipe that into the pipeline. It's just worth noting. And then we have our differential object. So compare and difference, exactly the same. So there's no issues with that. Oh, sorry, they're exactly the same. They're basically different. You can have two different objects. They need to be the same type. So if it's a PS custom object or a PS object, it's fine. If it's an integer and a string, it can get a bit wonky. Essentially, I think custom compare object does bring them down to its converts them, but it's still a bit wonky. Oh, excuse me. All right. So the next thing, I just want to make sure I'm still live because it says 0 viewers and it just completely dropped out. It says, yep, okay, we're good. We're still good. All right, so the next thing we have is obviously we can name our property to what we want to compare. So if we wanted to compare a specific property, so if you have, for example, the process name and we wanted to compare that, that's what it will compare on. So essentially, this compare object is very, very quite useful, especially for comparing information. So I'm just going to go ahead and erase all this ink, and we're going to jump onto the next slide. So compare object has other parameters. So we have our includes equal. So included equal, like we said before, it shows items that are the same. So if you want, by default, it's omitted, but if you specify it, it's then included. Now it's the same with it's slightly different with exclude different. By default, exclude different is included, but you need to exclude it if you don't want to show the differences. But essentially, it doesn't show the differences. Now this is actually a really unusual one, but it's really, really cool. So the sync window basically searches the number of adjacent objects that can be you can nominate the number of adjacent objects that can be searched when it can't find the object in the same position. So think of it as, this is actually a really good example. We have two arrays here, for example. We have one array which has just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Very, very basic, very straightforward. And then we have a second array here, which is, we have 5, 1, 4, 2, 3, 4. These kinds of shenanigans. Essentially, this would equate to true if we had a sync window of 3. Because it's capable of looking around for, well, is it in the next element? Oh, sorry, sorry, it's in the next element. So essentially, it's a really, 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 really handy way of kind of adjusting it. So it's a little bit more flexible in that sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to go jump into a demo. So it's demo time. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to compare objects. So what we're going to do is we're going to use get process. Now I'm just going to demo the basic one because I think most of it, you generally don't really use it all the time. And this is this is definitely a rabbit hole. So I'm not really going to spend much time on this, but it's just really good to know though. So we're going to use get process, and we're going to do we're going to use just an array as well. So let's start with get process first. So we're going to have we have our group. Let's keep our existing content. So we have multiple instances of paint. We're going to group them all, and we're just going to group them by MS Paint. So now we've grouped them by MS Paint. So what we can do here now is we can actually so we've got our MS Paint information here. Now what we can do is we can actually go, okay, we've got our group. We're actually just going to compare two MS Paint objects. I actually think there's going to be no differences between them. So if we go property, and then we're going to go MS Paint group objects.group, and we're going to just specify the first item, the first object, and we're going to compare it to MS Paint group objects.group, and we're going to say the very first value. And we're just going to see what happens. This is going to be interesting because I don't know what it's going to do. Cannot index into a null array. Oh, okay, that's fantastic. Line one. Oh, it helps if I actually see if it has it. Okay, now we've got some content there. Sweet. So if we rerun this, oh, damn it. Silly me. I just need to fix this. we'll go 1 there, and then we'll go 0 there. So if we compare these two objects, now they should be different, but I don't know what they're going to be doing. There's no change, it looks like. So if we actually include equals, they're exactly the same. They're basically typed. Now, that's cool. Like that's cool. But let's say we want to actually, measure something else. So we can actually go property, and let's have a look at what else is in there. So if we have a quick look at something that's else is in there. So like the ID can be completely different. So if we search on the ID, for example, and let's have a look at this. You can see they have two separate IDs. So we can actually see, okay, the left-hand side has this type of ID, the right-hand side has this type of ID. So that's basically compare object. It's a pretty cool thing. Let's do it with an array. So we're going to have array A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now the only item that should exist, technically speaking, should be 3, because basically they sit in the same position. But when we use sync window, we should actually see that change. So let's just do this. So we've got array A and array B, and then we've got our property ID. It's saying I have 0 viewers, which is really weird. I'm pretty sure there's people watching. It just went from 5 to 0, which is weird. I feel like there's something going on with it. That's weird. Anyway, so essentially compare object array A, array B. So if we run those and then we actually get rid of this because we don't have any properties in it, it's just a straight array, and we run a compare object. It should be playing ball. Should be playing ball. We should actually be able to see. That should actually be different. Ah, it's not. That's interesting. I didn't even use the sync window. Well, there you go. Now let's just do this. Let's put a 6 there. That's quite clever, because I thought you need to specify a sync window. Okay, you don't. Oh, that's sort of cool. So essentially now if we rerun this, there should be a 6 obviously doesn't exist in A, so we should actually see there, yeah, there's our side indicator of 6. So yeah, that's essentially compare object. It's pretty straightforward. So I am very, very surprised. I'm actually just going to do this and see what happens here, because now I'm intrigued. So, okay, yep, so we can see multiple ones, and then we should see, yep, and then we've got a 6 on the other side. So, it's capable of searching wherever, which is actually really quite cool. Anyway, compare object, that is that. So, oh, I just closed VS Code, damn it. I'll just reopen it. There we go, cool. All right, so next one. Sort object. Sort object is exactly what it says it is. It's basically just sorts objects by property values. So for example, a good example is predominantly everyone just uses this collection sort object, but obviously you can specify the property name or with using the property parameter. You can use the descending, so you can flip it from ascending to descending. By default it defaults to ascending. So it's just worth mentioning. Some other things is you can use, it has a unique parameter. So what it does is it removes duplicates. So it's basically the same as select distinct in SQL, if you know SQL. You can do case sensitive matching, which is really, really quite cool. You can specify a different cultural configuration. So cultures, that's actually for one thing I forgot to mention. So cultures are obviously how the different keyboard layouts and things like that. So you use get culture, it'll have a look at that. Then we have top. So top basically is the number of objects to get from the start of a sported. I think I'm supposed to run from the start of a sorted, not sported, object array. So I'm just going to end the show. And we're going to discard that. I'm just going to fix that up. So current slide. So yeah, from the start sorted from the start of a sorted object array. So very, very quite handy. So what we're going to do is let's have a quick demo of that. So let's use get process again. So currently get process, if we have a quick look at it, it formats on the process name. We can see that that's actually in alphabetical order. But we don't want to see that. We want to see CPU usage. So what we can do is we can go get process, sort object, property, CPU. Now if we do that, we get, let me just filter through this again. You can see now we're actually sorting by the lowest to the highest. But let's go one step further. Let's flip it. We want to see the highest performing processes. So now if we rerun it, processes. So if we rerun this, we can see now right up the top here, we've got Runtime Broker, WaterFox, Discord, OBS, Microsoft Photos. There you go. There you go. So essentially that's sort object. Now, we've got multiple instances. Remember, we've got multiple instances of Paint open. Now, let's just get a list of processes that are that we don't care about duplicates. So what we're going to say is like so. So what we can do here is we can just basically say get process, sort object, property, process name. Then we're going to say unique, like so. And then if we run this, we can basically see now we've got, if we think about MS Paint, there's only one instance of it. We don't really care about it. So it's really, really useful to filter. So if you're just wanting to remove duplicates from a list. So another way to illustrate that. So if we go array, and we're just going to define an array, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're going to 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Sort object unique. Rerun that, and you can see it only returns 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it excludes, all the subsequent ones after that because they're duplicates. So essentially that's sort object. All right, next one, format list. So format list basically formats the output as a list of properties. Each property appears on a new line. So again, super basic. So collection, format list. Oops, I've got to go back to the pen. So if we go to our pen, we got our collection, piping it to format list. And basically we can specify the property name. By default, it'll just use the default properties. But if you specify the property name, you can say whatever. If obviously you use star, basically star says everything. Give me everything, similar to select star in SQL or select object star. It also obviously has other objects, so you can actually group it by the property, based on the property or the value of the property. So that can be really handy if you basically want to see all of MS Paint's processes, things like that. So, and you can group them, and it'll group them in each, it actually groups them in its own collection. So it's quite handy. So if we go back into here, let's just go to format list. So we're just going to go here, we're just going to go get, so we're just going to go get process, we're going to say format list. We're going to use the default values. So you can see here, that's basically the default properties that it's returning from the object. Get processes and the default properties. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to go get the processes, show all. So we're going to get process, we're going to go format list. Then we're going to go properties, and then we're going to say star. So essentially when you see me do this, essentially it's the same as line 4. It's just that I'm obviously using shortcuts. So you can see there, this is every process and all its subsequent properties. Very handy to use, especially when you're trying to troubleshoot something and you're looking for information. Let's get the processes. Get processes. We're going to group them by name. So we're going to get process. We're going to go format list, and then we're going to go. We're going to just go by default because that's pretty easy. Then we're going to go group by process name. And so if we rerun this, we should actually get all the values that are grouped together. So just trying to find some. So as you can see here, process name WaterFox, and you can see there basically they're the group processes there. Really quite handy to know. So that's basically format list. All right, let's go ahead and clear the slides, erase all ink. All right, next one, format table. Sounds exactly the same as format list. It basically formats the output as a table. So we have our collection, pipe, format table. Obviously we can use the auto size, so it'll automatically size it. You can specify the properties that you want to add to that table. So you can have process name, the CPU, things like that. You can also have group by, so similar to what we had with format list. You can group the sorted output into separate tables. We can hide the headers if we want. We can repeat the headers when the screen's full, and we can wrap. So similar to Notepad's wrap text. So basically, if it exceeds the length of the line, it'll write it to the next line. So rather than kind of keeping it on the same line and getting all weird, it'll just write it to the next line. So let's have a quick look at that. What's the time? 10:43. We're making good progress. So if we jump back in here, and we're going into format table. So if we go, let's just go get process, and then we're going to go format table, like so. We're just going to run the default. So if we run it, you can see it's exactly the same as just get process. It's just basically they're literally the same. But let's say we only want format only on name and CPU. And path, let's say path as well. So we can go get process, format table, and then we're going to go property, and then we're going to go process name, then we're going to go CPU, and then we're going to go path. So if we rerun this, and let's auto size it, we want it to be nice. So we're just going to use the auto size. So it's going to write if the line's longer than if the line's longer than the current line, it'll basically write to the corresponding line. So yeah, it'll auto size. Sorry, we're going to use wrap, not auto size. So basically, if the text is too long, it'll write to the next line. We're not going to need auto size. So you can see here, there's a nice formatted table. Some of it's been missing because the data's just not there. So you can see here, and the reason why is probably because I don't have permissions to query it. So there's a whole bunch of different stuff there, which is quite cool. So that's pretty straightforward. So so the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to group them. So get process, format table, we're going to go property, and then we're going to go name, and then we're going to go group by. And we're going to say group by name. Actually, we're going to go do this. Then we're going to go group by, and then we're going to go process name. We actually should see a nice formatted list, there you go, of all the different filtered values according to the name. So you can see there's WaterFox, there's import app, there's VMM, there's obviously a whole bunch of SVC hosts, executables, and yeah, so it's essentially a really, really handy way of creating a quick table in PowerShell. Alrighty, did I save that? I hope I did. Yes, I did. Perfect. Next one. Out grid view sends output to a GUI table. A lot of people were screaming about this in PowerShell 6. Some people live with it, other people don't. I don't generally use it, but it's good to know that it's there. It's always good to know that it's there. Out grid view is really good just when you kind of need to get out there and just have a quick click around, and you kind of just need to visually inspect something. So one of the things that you need to do though is you need to specify the pass-through parameter if you want to pass the collection back into the pipeline. I'm going to show you the two different types so you can actually see why. But essentially, outgrid view can make changes to the value, and then you can pass it straight back into the pipeline. So yeah. So what we can do is we're going to go back into format outgrid view. Now I'm going to have to run this in Visual Studio, in ISE, because outgrid view doesn't exist in PS Core 6. I haven't updated it to 7. So if we go get process, then we go outgrid view, then we're just going to get pass through. So what we're going to need to do is we're actually going to quickly explore this really on Explorer, and then we're just going to open this up in the IC, because the IC runs 5.1. So here's our grid view. So let's run it. So you can see here, it's basically a GUI. We've got our GUI. Sweet. And you can do things. So we can basically filter on the search name. We can say its criteria is, let's say it's MS Paint or Paint. It obviously is contains, and we can do we can see those information. We're like, cool, that's cool. Now this is not using pass through. So once I close this window, that data is gone. To prove this, I'm just going to do this. So essentially this line here, we're going to filter again by the pass-through, but we're going to basically pass the data back into the pipeline, and we're going to see a printout of the process name into the console here. So let's go ahead and run this. Oh, it's passed through. It's not passed through, it's passed through. Sorry, I'm going to actually correct that right now as well. I thought it was, but then I was thinking, no, it shouldn't. Yeah, anyway. So essentially, let's go ahead and run it. So now the biggest way you can notice is down the bottom corner here. You can see we've got an OK and cancel. It gets added only when it has to pass into the object. So what we can do is let's add our criteria again, and we're just going to filter on Paint. So MS Paint. We're going to select those items like so. So we've selected those items, and we're going to hit OK. Once we hit OK, down in the console, down at the bottom here, we're going to see those process names come through. And there you can see. Let's just change that to the ID so we can actually see that I'm not kind of fooling around here. Let's rerun this. So again, let's just add our criteria. Process name contains MS Paint. And hit OK. And as you can see, there are all the different IDs. So this is quite handy if you need to do something quickly visually and then pass it all back in. Essentially, yeah, that's out grid view. So that concludes today's lesson. So if you guys have got questions, definitely start firing them off now. We've got about 10 minutes, so we've ended on time, which is really good. It's always good when we end on time. But definitely hit me up for questions if you have any questions. I'm just going to go ahead and end the show. Discard all ink annotations. So cool. I'm just going to go ahead and save that. So essentially, I'm just going to focus on me. So essentially, that's pretty much it for today's lesson. One of the things we're going to do, however, is we're going to do a. I just want to see. Yep, sorry. What we're going to do is we're going to do a. I'm not going to be. We can do a quick Q&A. For another stream. So if there's any other questions or anything you kind of want to bounce ideas off in terms of scripting things, definitely we can do a Q&A so I can kind of help out with that. With regards to the next week's session, that's going to be there's not going to be a lesson next week due to me being unavailable that day. It's my daughter's birthday, so I won't be there. So essentially we'll be having a 1 week break and then we'll be back at it the following week. Now, yeah, if you got questions, definitely hit me up and let me know. That'll be, yeah, definitely let me know. So, let's see how we're going. If there's anyone going to ask questions. I feel like Twitch broke halfway through this because there was 5 viewers and then they've all dropped. So I'm not sure if they're watching because Twitch is really weird. We will see. We will see. So if you've got questions, just fire them in. We'll go from there. Yeah, I'm going to leave it open for a little longer. And then, yeah, we will finish the stream. If you're watching this and you have questions, you can just jump into the Discord channel and drop questions in there as well. So that's also an option for you guys. Alrighty, so what we're going to do is we're going to leave it there for this stream. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you're watching, I don't know, Twitch just might be having some issues and everyone got kicked off. I don't know what's going on. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave it there for today. If you're watching, obviously, if you're in the US, have a very late night. It's going to be very late for you guys. Actually, no, it's very early in Europe right now. It's afternoon in US, I think. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. Next week is not happening, so there's going to be 1 week break. We're going to be back the following week. The following week, we're going to be looking at... let's have a quick look what we've got on the pipeline. What do we have in the pipeline? PowerShell and looping. Ooh, cool stuff. So basically, we're going to be doing PowerShell and looping. Again, we're just going to be covering the basics. We're not going to be covering any new stuff with PowerShell 6. We're just going to be covering the basics. And going from there. So essentially, in that, I probably will be also including if then else statements. And we'll probably also include try catch. I'm just thinking, yes, we will. We'll probably include those items in there. So that's kind of like the precursor, and then we'll step into looping. But that's going to be it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Definitely, like I said, 1 week off next week. If you've got a colleague or something like that who basically you want to teach PowerShell to, they kind of just kind of want to do it in their own time. This is obviously an awesome opportunity for them to kind of just watch these videos and at least pick something up. Yeah, if you liked it, don't forget to follow me on Twitter if you've got a Twitter account, or just follow my Discord channel. Also follow the Brisbane PowerShell. Follow the YouTube group if you're watching on YouTube. But anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed it. See you in 2 weeks, and have a good week and good weekend. Bye for now.